not children. Come closer and listen well. Let me tell you the story of the shadow in the mirror, a tale that will make you think twice before you gaze into your own reflection. This story has been told around campfires and whispered in darkened rooms for many years, a warning to those who are too curious for their own good. In a quaint little town, much like ours, there lived a young woman named Margaret. She was known for her beauty and grace, but also for her vanity. Margaret had a fascination with mirrors, always admiring her reflection, spending hours in front of the looking glass. One day, while browsing through an antique shop, she found a mirror unlike any she had ever seen. It was old and ornate, its frame intricately carved with symbols and figures that seemed to move in the light. The shopkeeper, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to see into your soul, warned her against buying it. "This mirror has a dark history," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "It's said to hold a shadow, a reflection that isn't your own. Once you look into it, the shadow follows you, watches you. You must never stare too long, or it will take your place." But Margaret, with her insatiable curiosity, brushed off the warning and bought the mirror. She took it home and hung it in her bedroom, admiring the way it seemed to glow in the evening light. She spent hours in front of it, captivated by her own reflection, oblivious to the shadow that lingered just out of sight. At first it was subtle, a flicker in the corner of her eye, a movement that didn't match her own. But as the days passed, the shadow grew bolder, more pronounced. Margaret would see it standing behind her, a dark, indistinct figure, mimicking her every move. She tried to convince herself it was just a trick of the light, her imagination playing tricks on her. But the shadow became more persistent, more real. One night, as Margaret was brushing her hair, she noticed something strange. The shadow in the mirror was moving on its own, its actions no longer mirroring hers. It reached out, its dark fingers pressing against the glass, and she felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to turn away, but the shadow's gaze held her, pulling her deeper into its dark, empty eyes. Margaret began to hear whispers, soft and insistent, calling her name. They came from the mirror, echoing through her mind, filling her with a sense of dread. She covered the mirror, hoping to silence the voices, but they only grew louder, more desperate. The next morning, she found strange marks on the surface of the glass, like scratches made by unseen hands. The reflection seemed distorted, twisted, as if the mirror was trying to escape its frame. Margaret's fear grew with each passing day, her once beautiful face now pale and drawn, her eyes haunted by the shadow that watched her from the other side. She tried to tell her friends, her family, but they dismissed her fears as nonsense, a figment of her overactive imagination. Desperate and alone, Margaret sought out the old shopkeeper, hoping he could help her break the mirror's curse. The shopkeeper listened to her tale, his face grim and knowing. "You have stared too long," he said, shaking his head. "The shadow has taken hold of you. There is only one way to free yourself." He handed her a small, ornate knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. "You must face the shadow," he said, his voice low and steady. "You must confront it, and you must be willing to fight for your soul." Margaret returned home, the knife heavy in her hand, her heart pounding with fear. She stood before the mirror, the shadow watching her, waiting. Taking a deep breath, she raised the knife and plunged it into the glass. The mirror shattered with a deafening crash, shards of glass flying in all directions. Margaret screamed as the shadow emerged, a dark, writhing mass that filled the room with an icy chill. It lunged at her, its dark tendrils wrapping around her, pulling her into its cold embrace. With a final, desperate cry, Margaret fought back, stabbing at the shadow with the knife, her screams echoing through the night. The darkness seemed to writhe and twist, its grip loosening as she struck again and again. Finally, with one last shuddering breath, the shadow dissolved, its dark presence fading into nothing. Margaret collapsed to the floor, the knife clattering from her hand, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. When she awoke, the mirror was gone, the room filled with the soft light of dawn. Margaret's face was pale, her eyes hollow, but she was free. The shadow had been banished, its dark curse broken. But the memory of the shadow remained, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the surface of our reflections. And Margaret, wiser and more cautious, never looked into a mirror again, fearing the shadows that might be waiting just out of sight. Gather round, children. Let me tell you a story about Old Man Cooper. This tale has been passed down through generations in our family, a story of whispers that still haunt the shadows of our memories. Old Man Cooper lived on the outskirts of our town in a decrepit, ivy-covered mansion. Folks said the house had a soul of its own, its creaking floorboards and groaning walls singing a song of sorrow and despair. Cooper himself was a recluse, a man whose eyes were said to hold the weight of countless untold stories, his voice a mere whisper against the howling winds. It was on a stormy night, much like this one, that Cooper's house became a beacon of terror. Lightning split the sky, and thunder roared like a ferocious beast. The townsfolk stayed indoors, huddled close to their fires. But young Billy Jenkins, a curious boy with a heart too bold for his own good, ventured towards Cooper's mansion. Billy was dared by his friends to knock on Cooper's door, to see if the old man would answer. You see, it was said that no one had seen Cooper for months, that he had become a ghost, a whisper of the man he once was. Billy, with his reckless courage, took up the challenge. He braved the storm, the wind biting at his skin, and approached the looming mansion. As he reached the door, he felt a cold, icy breath on the back of his neck, a whisper that seemed to come from the very shadows. "Turn back," it said. "Leave this place." But Billy, stubborn and brave, ignored the warning. He raised his hand and knocked on the heavy wooden door. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the rumble of thunder and the patter of rain. Then the door creaked open, just a sliver, and a pair of eyes peered out from the darkness. Billy's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground. "Who dares disturb me?" came a voice, barely a whisper, yet it cut through the storm like a knife. It was Old Man Cooper, or what was left of him. His face was gaunt, his skin pale as a ghost, but it was his eyes that frightened Billy the most, eyes that seemed to hold the darkness of the night itself. I wanted to see if you were real," Billy stammered, his courage faltering under Cooper's intense gaze. The old man's lips curled into a thin, unsettling smile. "Real?" he echoed. "Oh, I'm very real, boy, and so are the whispers that haunt this house." Before Billy could react, Cooper's hand shot out, grabbing the boy's wrist with a grip colder than death. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice echoing through the empty halls. "Now you will hear them too." Billy screamed, but the storm swallowed his cries. He pulled free from Cooper's grasp and fled, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He didn't stop running until he was safely back in his own home, where he collapsed into a trembling heap. But the horror didn't end there. That night, as Billy lay in bed, he heard them, the whispers, soft at first, barely audible, but growing louder with each passing minute. They spoke of dark things, of shadows that moved and eyes that watched. Billy's nights were filled with these voices, tormenting him, haunting him. His parents grew worried, seeing their once bold boy turn pale and withdrawn. They took him to doctors, priests, anyone who might help. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed Billy everywhere, a dark, unseen presence that clung to him like a shadow. Years passed, and Billy grew into a man, but he never escaped the whispers. He moved away from the town, trying to leave the horror behind. But they followed him, a constant reminder of that stormy night. He never spoke of what happened to anyone, but those who knew him could see the fear in his eyes, the shadows that haunted his every step. And as for Old Man Cooper's mansion, it still stands on the outskirts of town, abandoned and forgotten. Some say the whispers can still be heard on stormy nights, carried on the wind, warning those who dare to venture too close. And the townsfolk, wise in their caution, steer clear of the old ivy-covered house, leaving its dark secrets to the shadows. So remember this tale, children, and heed its warning. Some whispers should never be heard, and some doors should never be opened. Come closer, children, and let me tell you about the Phantom Train. This story is one of our family's oldest, a tale whispered through the generations about a train that no one dares to ride anymore. Back in the days of steam and steel, when trains were the lifeblood of our towns, there was a locomotive known as the Midnight Express. It was said to be the fastest train, a marvel of engineering, cutting through the dark like a bolt of lightning. But with its speed came a price, a dark secret that would doom those who dared to board it. The Midnight Express was driven by a man named Henry Lawson, a proud and skilled engineer who took great pride in his train. He had no family, no ties, just the iron beast he commanded through the night. Folks said he had a strange look in his eyes, a glint of madness that only grew with each journey he made. One fateful night, as the clock struck 12, Henry set off on his usual route. The train roared through the countryside, its whistle piercing the silence, its wheels clattering on the tracks. But this journey was different. As the train sped through a dense fog, the air grew cold, and a strange, oppressive silence fell over the carriages. The passengers, sensing something amiss, looked out of their windows but saw nothing but darkness and mist. The conductor, an old man with a face as craggy as the mountains, tried to reassure them, but his own eyes betrayed his fear. The train seemed to be moving faster than ever, the landscape blurring into an endless stream of shadows. Henry, at the helm, felt an icy grip around his heart. He tried to slow the train, to pull the brake, but the controls wouldn't respond. The engine roared louder, the wheels spun faster, and a chilling realization dawned on him. The train was no longer under his control. It was as if a phantom force had taken over, driving the Midnight Express to an unknown destination. The passengers began to panic as the train hurtled through the night, faster and faster. They could see ghostly figures in the fog, pale and ethereal, watching them with hollow eyes. The conductor, trembling with fear, whispered of legends, of a train that was cursed to ride the rails forever, a train that collected lost souls. As the Midnight Express approached the next station, the lights flickered and the air grew colder. The train didn't slow down. Instead, it seemed to accelerate, barreling through the station without stopping. The people on the platform screamed as the ghostly train sped past, their cries lost in the roar of the engine. Henry fought with the controls, his hands frozen to the levers, his breath frosting in the air. He could see the end of the line approaching, a dark abyss waiting to swallow the train. He closed his eyes, bracing for the impact, but it never came. The train plunged into the darkness, and the world around it seemed to vanish. When Henry opened his eyes, he found himself in a strange twilight world. The train was gliding through a desolate landscape, a place of shadows and whispers. The passengers were silent, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes empty. The Midnight Express had become a ghost train, a vessel carrying lost souls through an endless night. Henry realized that he was doomed to ride the Phantom Train forever, a captive of its cursed journey. He tried to scream, to call for help, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. The train sped on, its whistle echoing through the void, its wheels clattering on invisible tracks. Back in our world, the Midnight Express never returned. The townspeople searched for it, but there was no trace of the train, no sign of its passengers. Some say they can still hear its whistle on foggy nights, a mournful sound that chills the blood and raises the hair on your neck. They say that if you're out late and you hear that whistle, you should turn away, for the Phantom Train still roams the rails, searching for new souls to carry into the night. And those who see it, those who dare to board it, are never seen again. So remember, children, if you ever hear that eerie whistle in the distance, stay far away. The Phantom Train rides on, and it's always looking for passengers to take on its endless journey. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more chilling tales. Share your thoughts and fears in the comments below. And remember, some souls just need to be remembered.